It's one of the last great wild places on the planet, the North and Central Pacific coast of Canada. Alternately known as the Great Bear Rainforest, it's the largest intact temperate rainforest on Earth.
Coastal British Columbia, virgin rainforests, wild fish, wild places. This is what the world is looking at.
There's nothing like living this type of lifestyle that we've had for thousands of years. We have fresh air, we have fresh water. We're a rich people. We're rich from the bounty of the sea.
It's a place of roaming wild wolves, majestic grizzlies and mythical spirit bears, wild salmon, orca, and one of the ocean's most magnificent creatures, humpback whales, which have miraculously returned to this coast in record numbers over the past decade. But these whales, fish, and wildlife, and the indigenous and coastal communities that depend on them, now find their very survival threatened by a proposal from energy giant Enbridge to bring an oil pipeline and supertankers to these fragile and dangerous coastal waters. The plan is to pump over 500,000 barrels a day of unrefined bitumen from the Alberta Tar Sands over the Rocky Mountains and across the heartland of BC to the Port of Kitimat. From there, some of the world's largest oil tankers would set sail along BC's rugged coast, through the Great Bear Rainforest, on their way to China and the United States. Dubbed the Northern Gateway Pipeline, the 1,100-kilometer, $6 billion project is of concern to opponents for three main reasons. One, the risks from the pipeline itself, which would cross over 1,000 rivers and streams. Two, the dangers of introducing oil supertankers for the first time to this part of the wild BC coast. And three, the fact the project would facilitate the rapid expansion of the tar sands, hooking emerging Asian economies on the world's dirtiest oil.
This is a Canadian project that is changing the Canadian experience, that is changing our politics, that's changing our economics, that's changing our international reputation abroad, that is changing everything we thought we knew about this country.
How are we going to tell other countries that they should be reducing fossil fuel consumption if we go forward and build this pipeline?
Now, a broad coalition of citizens and concerned organizations from Canada and around the world are joining forces to halt this contentious proposal from Enbridge, the world's biggest oil pipeline construction company.
Whatever it takes. I mean, and our position right now is this project's not going to happen.
Clearly, Canada is at a crossroads. The country must now decide whether to allow the expansion of the tar sands with this pipeline, or heed the growing calls from around the world to change course, keeping this wild coast wild and oil-free. Given the stakes, the pipeline issue is shaping up to be the defining Canadian environmental battle of our time. At a recent press conference in Vancouver, chosen for the anniversary of the disastrous Exxon Valdez oil spill, an unprecedented alliance of Indigenous people, local and international conservation groups, and high-profile figures announced a unified declaration against the Enbridge proposal.
They told us, and they said this at their AGM as well, that if all of the communities within this geographic region didn't support the pipeline, that they would stop the project. We are here to tell you today that all of the communities are opposed to Enbridge.
Today, we're putting Enbridge on notice, we're putting governments on notice, and we're putting ourselves on notice that from here on out, when it comes to our culture, which comes from our relationship to the land, we are going to be firm.
Following the historic declaration, several of these coastal First Nations hosted a large feast on the traditional territory of the Haisla people near the town of Kitimat, the location of the proposed tanker terminal. The feast saw over 1,000 people from the territory and around BC share their cultures, their friendship, and their joint convictions to stop the pipeline and tankers. BC's coastal First Nations are unanimously opposed to the pipeline and tanker proposal, while polls show that 80% of British Columbians support banning crude oil tankers on the province's coast.
It's not a matter of if, but when a major oil spill would happen if they went forward with this proposal. That'll impact salmon and bears and just the incredible wildlife diversity that is found there. Not to mention, of course, First Nations communities that rely on the ocean for their survival.
Among the many marine species threatened by tankers are the whale populations that inhabit these waters in abundance. Orca, fin, and humpback whales, amongst other cetaceans, face threats not just from an oil spill, but from ship strikes, as in this fin whale hit by a cruise ship on the same coastline last year, and the submarine noise pollution from tankers, in excess of 100 decibels, that impacts whales' vital acoustic sensibilities. This very part of the coast proposed for tanker traffic has been designated by the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans as critical habitat for humpbacks, recognized as a species at risk. Herman Muter is a whale researcher whose team at the Cutting Edge Cetacea Lab has been studying whales on the coast for the past decade.
We now have about 185 resident humpback whales which is rising from about 20 to 30 in 2002. And one reason why we think the humpbacks do sing here so much is because these waters here, including Whale Channel, Squally Channel, Bright Sound, Camana Sound, are for the most part quiet underwater worlds. If Enbridge gets approved with their Gateway Pipeline project, and we have these supertankers coming here, where supertankers are the loudest vessels underwater, and I think we are going to lose this quiet underwater world where the whales still can sing, and I think the whales are not going to continue to sing. They will just stop. They will even perhaps move on and just disappear from this area altogether.
These waters are teeming with other important marine life too, including diverse marine mammals, salmon, halibut, various rockfish, shellfish, herring, eulachon, birds, and many other species, which would all be gravely threatened by oil tankers. The iconic land mammals of the coast are also in jeopardy, most notably the famous spirit bear, a unique black bear with white fur. In actual numbers, as rare as the panda, this extraordinary creature can only be found in the Great Bear Rainforest, directly in the path of the proposed oil tankers. These ecological concerns are compounded by the likelihood of a spill, given that the proposed tanker route, out Douglas Channel and along the BC north and central coast, is fraught with navigational hazards. These enormous ships would need to travel at speeds in excess of 15 knots through treacherous reefs and rocks, fast-moving currents, and frequent gale and even hurricane-force winds, year-round, regardless of conditions. These waters continue to be the site of shipping disasters. Several years ago, a passenger ferry, the Queen of the North, sank here and is still sitting on the ocean floor, leaching fuel into the marine environment.
The waters of the Pacific, they're not calm every day of the year. The weather system has changed so much that we get more southeast storms than we've ever had.
The oil these tankers would carry is of serious environmental concern in and of itself. The extraction, refining, and production of tar sands bitumen, a viscous substance that needs to be mixed with natural gas condensate just to make it flow, produce far higher climate change causing carbon emissions than conventional oil. As leading tar sands expert and author Andrew Nikiforuk told a recent gathering of citizens in Vancouver.
The National Energy Technology Lab recently looked at this, and they looked at domestic crude in the United States, and they said, okay, what are the carbon emissions when we're making diesel fuel and using crude from different sources? And they found that the stuff with the highest footprint, bar none, was the stuff from Venezuela and Canadian bitumen. 244% more carbon.
The source of this bitumen is the single largest and most polluting industrial project on the planet, the Alberta Tar Sands. In addition to their enormous carbon emissions, these tar sands projects spread throughout the Peace River and Athabasca basins are contaminating watersheds and ecosystems. which fish and wildlife and indigenous communities depend upon for their survival. We offered Enbridge numerous opportunities to comment for this film, but the company denied our requests. However, the Enbridge president in charge of the pipeline project, John Carruthers, has been outspoken of late about the benefits of the project. This recent op-ed piece by Carruthers was in response to the federal opposition leader's vow to impose a moratorium on oil tankers on BC's north coast, a major political blow to Enbridge's proposal. In response, Carruthers tried to downplay the project's risks while selling its economic benefits. But the truth is, the people of BC would receive very little economic benefit from the Enbridge project, compared with the enormous risks to the environment, to First Nations, and communities spanning the pipeline an entire length of BC's coast. The province is simply a necessary pass-through point for the pipeline, or, as some have charged, a doormat. After the 3-year construction phase, few long-term jobs would remain, and many of the construction workers would be imported from outside of local communities and the province. Weighed against the potential consequences of the project, the economic benefits simply don't add up.
Opposing is something that's not really part of a business culture. What bothers me about this pipeline issue is looked at from all sides, up, down, any way you can. There is no way forward. That opposition is the only viable thing you can do. It is a very simple equation. The pipeline exists, and sooner or later we will not.
Enbridge critics in BC needn't point further than their northern neighbor to remind people of the ecological and economic risks of oil tanker traffic. Years after the disastrous Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska, entire fish and wildlife populations and coastal communities have yet to recover. What's more, the navigation route of the Valdez through Prince William Sound was far less dangerous than the proposed Enbridge tanker route. By superimposing the impact area of the Exxon spill over BC's coast, one begins to get a sense of just what's at stake here. Its 2,200-kilometer length would cover virtually the entire BC coast.
If we had a tanker accident on the coast of British Columbia, it would literally wipe out all of our cultures, all of our salmon, all of our ground fish and halibut and cod and everything else. We cannot allow this to happen.
We're over 20 years since the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska, and they're still analyzing the impact. They're still finding crude oil in the beaches. The orca whales still have not returned, and economies and communities have been devastated by it.
The recent catastrophe still unfolding in the Gulf of Mexico from the blowout of BP's Deepwater Horizon oil well has also provided a potent reminder of the risks of introducing oil to sensitive coastlines. And Enbridge itself has given British Columbians even more cause for concern, following their own recent disaster in Michigan, where the company's pipeline spilled close to 4 million liters of oil, contaminating the Kalamazoo River and nearby residential community of Battle Creek. Adding insult to injury, the same company has had 2 other major pipeline leaks since then, in Illinois and near Buffalo, New York. The west coast of Canada is no stranger to environmental battles, but nothing so far compares to what's coming down the pipeline now. The resistance to the Enbridge proposal, led first and foremost by First Nations, is growing stronger by the day.
Enbridge had come into Hartney Bay and had a meeting there. You could feel when you're being patronized. You know, a little isolated community of 160 people. And so I told him, what you see here is not what you get. We're a clan system, we're First Nations, we have relatives all up and down this coast. And we're all coastal people and we depend on the sea. And whatever help we need, they're going to be there.
Everything is at stake here in this battle over the pipeline and BC's coast. Our international reputation, our constitution that protects Aboriginal title and rights, the democratic voice of the majority of British Columbians, and the last bastions of Canadian wilderness. What's at risk here is nothing short of one of the most spectacular places on Earth. As awareness of the plan builds, expect this issue to become a defining battle between big oil and a growing grassroots network.
Canada could step in now and say, this isn't the future. This is not our future. This is not what we want for our children or for our country or for the planet, and put a stop to this.
Will the oil industry once again be allowed to trample over the public and environmental interest? Or will people power prove this scheme to be only a pipe dream?